Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. My name is Eric Rossborough. I am Associate Librarian and Senior Cataloger here at the McCracken Research Library. Very proud to be here today with my colleagues and friends, Bob Richard and Mac Frost. We're going to be talking about the Kerwin mine. A little bit of housekeeping. Upcoming on November 21, Bob and I think Bob Coe will be talking about the Coe family. In December, we're having an event on December 19th, and the topic will be Rebecca West and other museum curators. In addition to that, Bob is hard at work trying to rope in the brothers Simpson, Al and Pete, for another appearance in October, so you're not going to want to miss that. And with that, I give you Mac and Bob.
Thank you for being here. I hope you can hear all right in the back there. You hear all right? Good. This is one of my favorite areas, and I'm giving you my thoughts, my involvement since a youngster going to Kerwin, meeting and being with Carl Dunrud and his family, my dad, and traveling in there by Jeep in the early days, but we'll go through, and I'm sharing Kerwin through my eyes. And there's a book that was written, and it's out of print, but there's going to be a few copies that I asked Robin to bring from the archives if you want more history about the Double D Ranch in Kerwin. And I got a lot of my information to add to my dad's photographs, my photographs, and I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for being here today. It's good to see you. All right, Mac, I think we're ready. This is an early day photograph, probably taken in the 20s, looking down what is the main street of Kerwin. And most of those cabins or parts of them are still there. Next.
Bob, this is the 20s.
I'm so damn old that I'm still thinking 19. I need you here every time, so please keep me straight. Thank you.
He's right, this is the 20s.
Well, I need a lot of help, I can tell that. This is the administration building. It also had their kitchen in there where they prepared food and fed people. It hasn't changed much. You can still walk through it and see it. And it is a special building, one of the first when you walk across the creek and come over to the main part of Kerwin. Next. This is further up the creek past where they've closed the road off, and it has a shaft in it and a big boiler and equipment to pull ore out from a shaft in a tunnel way down below. Next. This is taken in the late 40s, early 50s, 1950s. Now you make me self-conscious, but anyway, Carl Dunrud is there, his two sons, and a man with a black hat. Next to Carl is Willard Rhodes, a rancher that brought his Jeep from Rattlesnake Creek, Dad and I, and we met with Carl and drove all over the area in a Jeep. Next. This is one of the buildings near Main Street. And next. Again, the administrative building. And looking down Main Street again. This is looking from the road across at part of Kerwin. Next. This is one of the cabins that normally you don't see, but we drove up to. And it is, I'm not sure where it is, I've forgotten. Next. This is looking out through one of the old mine shafts, and it's collapsing. I wouldn't go in there, but and I think that's Richard, or they called him Rich Dunrood, in the foreground. Next. This is a boiler, and that's Carl and Willard Rhodes, and it's changed a little bit today, but this was taking, and that had to have produced a lot of steam power. Next. Now that's water halfway up, and this is one of Carl's sons walking on logs back there. I wouldn't do that, but I wouldn't go in a tunnel anymore either.
This is the looking in the opposite direction from that first picture that we saw of the entrance to the tunnel. This is looking down the tunnel. Yeah, I wouldn't go in there either.
Yeah, that's about way steep. Next. This is about 4 miles or 5 miles from Kerwin, and this is the power plant that was designed to provide electric power to the town of Kerwin, and it never got completely completed. But we'll see photographs where you can see part of it today. But this was taken on our tour with Willard and Carl. Next. This is the Jeep that Willard brought Dad and I had to sit in the back, and we were driving all around the hillsides around Kerwin.
And you'll notice up here in the background a couple of buildings. This one here on the left is subsiding, and it has tipped over at about a 45-degree angle.
Next. This is looking out another tunnel. Now, take a careful look. Do you know what that is? That's Carl and Willard in a double outhouse sitting there, and they were posing. They thought that was just the best thing, and my dad photographed them, and they were having a big time that day. Next. That's some of the water and all the stuff coming out of one of the mines.
Almost looks like one of the
Yellowstone
up at
features.
Yellowstone, yeah. Very similar in nature.
Another view of the mountains around there, pretty rugged. Another building, lots of them that most of us wouldn't walk up to today. We drove a Jeep. And this is looking to the west on Main Street. This is looking, we drove up the hill and looked down on the town of Kerwin there.
When you come into Kerwin nowadays, you're right over here on the
North
left,
side.
yeah, the north side of the creek, and I don't think those buildings are there anymore.
No, they're gone.
Yeah.
Parts of them are still there.
But down here in the bottom, that's where the rest of the buildings are at.
This is looking east, and most of those buildings are still there. Next.
Before we go a little bit too much further, there's a line here out of this timeline that Bob brought down. I was perusing it before we started it. In 1902, exploration was well established at Kerwin. Over 200 people and 38 buildings were in place, and they included boarding houses, a hotel, a sawmill, a post office, stores, and houses, but no saloons, no cemetery, and no brothels.
To add to that, they were running a stagecoach into Kerwin one day, and then the stagecoach hauling passengers would go out the next day. So every other day, you could get to Kerwin or get to Meeteetse.
Where is Kerwin?
Kerwin is about 37 miles southwest of Meeteetse. And it's up, you go up the Grable, turn off on the Wood River, and then travel on the Wood River all the way up to Kerwin. And it's spectacular. It's one of the, you don't want to go there with your modern day car, and definitely not an electric car. But it's best to take a four-wheel drive because you're crossing the creek many times, and keep in mind that if there's high water, you don't want to go there before about the middle of July. And I've been going there since I was in scouting, and I went there with my dad and Willard Rhodes and Carl Dunroot before that. A spectacular place that they mined gold, they mined copper, they mined lead, they mined silver. And I'm not sure that they ever got enough out of there to make it a producing kind of mine. But later on, Amax came in and bought it, and then the bottom dropped out of copper, and another gentleman bought Kerwin from the Dunroots, and he gave it to the Forest Service, which included the Sunshine Ranch further down on the Wood River. And when the man gave the Forest Service Kerwin, he gave the Game and Fish the Sunshine area. So Kerwin Holdings held a larger area, and back in about 1903, Ernie May traded his interest in the mining interest in Kerwin for the property that became the Antlers Ranch. And the Antlers Ranch became the Mays and the May families, which is still owned by Mays, although I saw that it was up for sale a few weeks ago. And but it originally was part of the Kerwin Holdings. All right, now what we're looking at here is when we were in scouting, we went up to Kerwin for a couple of summer trips, and Paul Purvis, who ran the buses here in town, provided the transportation to get us in there, and that's an old military power wagon, an ambulance, and that's what we rode in. And we had a truck that carried all our camping gear, and we spent a week up there 2 different summers, or early fall before school started. Glenn Livingston was our scoutmaster, and we got out and camped every summer into the fall. We winter camped on the North Fork at what later became the Scout Camp, but Livy kept us camping and out of town and out of trouble a lot. All right. And this is on the pavement before we went into Wood River and up to Kerwin. We set up our camp up near the town, and I still have the cook stove in the old box that we took on our jamboree in 1953 to California. And we always ate well. We learned that you had to have good food to keep boys going, as you will see as we go along here. There's Glenn Livingston, Carl Dunroot, and in between is Jerry Reed, And then down in front of Carl is Freddie McGee, Mel McGee's son, and John is still living here. Freddie, I think, is living elsewhere, but I don't know where next. Here we are with Pete Luckenbill up on the left, and Don Williams, who's since passed. And Pete Luckenbill was going to college in Colorado in School of Mines and was fighting a fire and stepped in a pond and was electrocuted. And he was about 22. But his brother has the Luckenbill lumber mill up in Crandall. And but Pete and I took pack trips with the scouts in Crazy Lakes and elsewhere, and he and I gathered horses and took our explorer post, and Livy was our post commander, and what was our football coach's name? Bill Waller. And Bill Waller was an axe thrower, and we put all our panniers up with our food in it, and a really nice camp, and Bill's showing some of the guys how to throw an axe, and it cut the ropes holding our panniers down, went everything, and Glenn Livingston, we called him Livy, he had a fit. Waller, you can't do anything right. And we all stayed way out of the way and laughed. Anyway, sorry I got sidelined. This is the administrative building. The Forest Service, of course, now owns it. They've stored core drillings in there from AMAX. Most of them have disappeared. But it's a great place to visit, walk through, and think about how tough people were back in those days. Next. This is Jerry Reed, Carl Johnson, and Bruce Pride that were behind me in high school. And they're on the roof of the superintendent's house that's down the street from the administration building.
These must be explorer scouts.
Yes, they
They're
were.
exploring the roof.
We explored everything. We got into everything. This is down where the electric power plant was, and all those logs have collapsed, but the metal wheel and part of the power plant is still there. And I could go through the names, but you probably don't know most of them anyway. But Livy had his hands full, let me tell you. There's Dean Spiedelberg and little Livy, who's living up here on the top of the old South Fork Hill, and they're arguing over whose pants they had washed in the creek. And can't you see the two of them trying to get a pair of wet trousers? And why they were arguing over it, I don't know, but it's one of my photographs.
Maybe they're just wringing the water out of the
Could
legs.
be. That's a good thought. This is coming out of Kerwin with the old power wagon. Great times, but Kerwin was very special to all of us. Then we had Amelia Earhart, and she became great friends with the Dunroods and fell in love with the area. And while her visits, before she took her Pacific flight, asked Carl to build a cabin for her, which was never finished because she was lost someplace in the Pacific. But this is one of the Belden photographs that shows Amelia Earhart and her love for this country. This is one of the aircraft that Amelia Earhart flew. And I'm not sure, is that Orion?
Lockheed Vega.
Lockheed Vega? Thank you. Next,
Great big single engine airplane.
I prefer 2 engines myself. Another shot, and that jacket is here in the museum. which I found to be interesting. There, she's getting a haircut with a pair of sheep shears. Definitely part of the early 1930s. That's Carl with his chaps. An interesting, go ahead next. Carl and his wife and Vera. And they were married in 1929, and Carl was a park ranger back in the early 20s, 22 through 25. And he wintered and summered. He spent a summer down in the lower part of Yellowstone and Thoroughfare. In wintertime, skied across Yellowstone Lake. And in his memories and also in the book that I have, he talks about he was going across this crust of snow on the lake, and he took his ski pole and stuck it upside down, and it went through the crust, and he hit water. He says, "There's no ice under here." And he carefully backed off and told his partner, "We've got a hot spring here in the lake." And of course, they went around it, but they were a lot more careful in crossing Yellowstone Lake with the hot springs, and it brought to my memory crossing Yellowstone Lake in a snowmobile or snowplane, doing about 70 miles an hour, and all of a sudden there was nothing but clear water. And I had it full power, got across it, and the other two snowplanes were wide enough they never saw it. But I'll tell you, it looked pretty gloomy until I got across there. But now nobody, machines-wise, snow machines or whatever, cross it. Anyway, this is there at Matisse. It's a monument with talking about Kerwin Lockhart and in memory of her and her visits to Wyoming and being a part of Kerwin and the Carl Dunroot family. Next. This is looking from the Double D Ranch up towards Kerwin. A spectacular meadow there. The Game and Fish has planted trout in there a few times. I've never had much luck above the falls, which are off to the left, but you end up crossing that creek that changes its bed several times every winter or spring. And it's a 4-wheel drive in there, according to Bob. This is looking back up at the Double D Ranch, the barn on the left, and the house is over on the right. Next. This is looking from the house down at some guest cabins and the barn, that type of thing. This is a Jeep in front of the main house. The garage is off to the left. The Forest Service has been rehabilitating the different buildings there, and you can no longer get in the house. I've stayed there overnight when the Dunroots lived there. And this is one of the Jeeps we used on this trip, and I did a lot of tours there for a number of years. But that's the front steps of the house.
Are the bathtubs still in the yard?
The bathtubs, to my knowledge, are no longer in the yard. This is Dave Sweet and his wife that went in on a tour with me. And he was always checking out where the fish were. Next. Another Jeep that went in with us on the same day. And there were guest cabins off to the right. Next. That's the barn. I don't know that they've started rehabilitating that yet or not. Hopefully they have. And the corrals. That's a guest cabin. Another one. Forest Service is trying to replace some of the lower logs, foundations, flooring, and roofs. So they're preserving it for future. This is a guess that I had on one of my trips, looking out, the windows are gone, but those are big, heavy logs, and this is at the Double D.
And it looks like it's got a new roof on it.
Yes, it is. Wow, what's that? How many of you been to Kerwin? Good. Well, you've seen the swimming pool. I would say that's the first swimming pool in the Batisi area. But anyway, I'm not sure that it held water very well, but they had lots of water coming down from a stream behind the house, and they would fill it up. Next. This is looking up the road, leaving the Double D and heading into Kerwin. That's one of my Jeeps. I still have too many Jeeps in my garage as we speak, but I bought my first Jeep when I was 13, and Sheriff Blackburn played bridge with my granddad every Thursday with the family, and he looked over his half glasses and he says, "Bobby, go down to the driver's license bureau, tell them that you're 16 and that you were born in 1933 and get a license." So I did. Nobody asked for my birth certificate or any of that nonsense. And so I was driving at the age of 13 with my first Jeep. Anyway, I still have them. Okay, looking
Those
at
were the days.
government didn't interfere too much back in those days. And I drove that.
Sounded like the government facilitated things in those days.
Thank you, Matt. Anyway, this is looking up at the town of Kerwin from the road. This is after AMAX went in and built the road wide enough to haul big trailer houses, and I think they were 10 feet wide in there for people to live in. And then they hauled them all out. Next. Another showing the cabins down near the bottom in the town of Kerwin. Now, looking down in the bottom off that edge, somebody rolled there, I believe it was not a Scout, but
Bronco.
a Bronco, and it rolled down that hill. Next. And that's still sitting there with the engine in it, spare tire in the back, the windshield's gone, but it's a tough walk down there, and I don't think people picked many of the parts, but it's still there. And if you know where it is, or you can find it on your way in or out, they never hauled it out, and the Forest Service never made them haul it out. But it's an interesting thing that I've always shared with guests when I've done tours in there.
This was driven by the first tourists into Kerwin.
Thank you, Mac.
Rough Snake Expedition.
This is that wheel that was involved in the power plant about 4 miles downstream from, and notice how the trees and the willows and what have you have grown around all that area. And they also put a discovery well looking for oil on the flat right in front of that. And it's capped off, but you can still see it there. Next. These are more parts for the power plant that are back in the trees. If you walk around there, you can find them. More pieces and parts. How they packed all that in with horses and wagons is amazing. The desire for gold and other minerals, to me, really had an effect on people. Next. This is up at the turnaround at the end of the road, and there's all kinds of signs telling you what's out there and a little bit of history. It's a great place to have lunch. Always take a lunch with you. And be sure that your spare tire is filled with air. I've helped a couple of people back to Matisse because their spare tire was not full of air. And it's a long 37 miles if you can't drive out. Next. Boom or bust, a little bit of the history. One of the many signs. Kerwin, the Forest Service is really working to make it friendly to those of us, but you need to read the history of the Carl Dunroot book before you go, and always go to the Matisse Museum and get any information that they have to share, and a lot of it's free, but you don't want to go uninformed to Kerwin. Next. This is a breakdown of some of the history, and this just touches on the highlights, but this is one of the signs there. This is one of the old cabins that was part of the avalanche in, I think it was 1903, that killed 3 people up there and probably brought the end of the town. And it's too bad, but it's just one of those things that happened, and people were worried about more avalanches, and it became the end of Kerwin.
According to the timeline here, up towards the top, on February 5th, 1907, after 9 days of heavy snowfall, a massive avalanche roared down Brown Mountain. It engulfed Tewksbury's store and home and swept them into the Wood River, killing 3 people, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Brunel and John Reynolds. Later that spring, most residents left Kerwin.
Thank you, Mag.
An avalanche will do that to you.
It still has an effect. And there's the administrative building again. And I think you can still get in there, but it looks like they've boarded it up the last time I was there. One of my guests that I took in there a few years ago, looking down Main Street, they had a lot of old buildings, and they're putting roofs on them and trying to repair the foundations. This is just off of Main Street. It's another shaft that goes down. And you walk over there and you can get in and see and we'll look at it here next. That's the bucket that came out of the bottom of the shaft that was filled with ore. Next. This was the winch that they had inside, and I couldn't figure out what they used for power, but it took a lot of power to get those wheels and that winch running. And when you walk in and see that, you can still work the levers to turn it on and off, but nothing operates anymore. Next. But look at the size of those wheels and what it took to pack it in there. Different views of the same thing. That's pretty heavy cable. There you can see the levers, and everybody could work the levers, and they still are usable, but no power. This is looking up the street from the superintendent's house to the administrative buildings and that type thing.
And this is looking in the opposite direction
There you go.
from the building.
Storage buildings, cabins. Next, that building was where the, I think the next picture shows the inside, where the horses could get out of the winter. And that's the stalls. And lots of snow. That's the superintendent's cabin, which is a 2-story. And that's the roof. It's been refinished, and the fireplace is gone, or the chimney. But that's where we had scouts on top of the roof. I'm not sure how we got up there, but we did.
Well, you climbed up the corner choices there.
Thank you, Mac. I'm sure that's what we did.
That's what I did.
It's all coming out. One of the old stoves that came out of the administrative building. Growing up, most of us in our homes as kids at my age, that's what we cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner on. Next. This is the Forest Service rehabilitating the roof on the cabin and the shaft further up the trail from the end of the highway. And there they've taken the roof off and are rebuilding it. You can see the boiler inside of it here. And that's all covered now. Next. There we go. Shows that they've got the roof back on it and have preserved the integrity of what was there before. They even have the stovepipe on it.
I don't know as I'd want to climb up the ladder there on the side of that shaft building.
I'm sure the Forest Service says no climbing, but
Probably.
I haven't seen the sign. This is one of my guests in front of the boiler. In later years, we saw an earlier photograph with Carl and Willard Rhodes looking at that boiler earlier in our pictures. This is a cabin further up that they've rehabilitated. There's a cow camp up there that's still being used, and I don't know who owns it, but they still use it. And other sheds and buildings. I'm not sure. I don't know that this. Pardon? Do you know the name of who owned this cabin? But it's near where Amelia Earhart's cabin was started, and her cabin didn't get this far along. But lots of these are up there. Next. Here's some children above the creek, and this, you don't get your feet wet when you park up there. You get to cross a real bridge and get over to the town of Kerwin without having to wade the creek. And that bridge is still there, or was the last time I was there. Next. This is looking, and I'm not sure which direction, but I think
We're
this
going
is
down now.
going down and going back out is the way we put it together. And this is one of the crossings.
Yeah, this is why you don't want to go up there during high water.
This is after the Double D Ranch, looking down the Wood River. And off to the right are a set of falls that stop trout from migrating up further, but Game and Fish has been planting trout above the falls. And the place across the street from the museum is part of what used to be a great grocery store that the Faleses ran back in the 40s and early 50s, and they lived upstairs. A lot of history there, and I understand somebody's working on that and trying to get part of that reopened to the public. But, and then that marks where the museum is in Matitsi, and a must to visit before you go in, and get as much information from them on your way into Kerwin. That's it. I think we got finished a little early for questions. And we have a question back here. We got to get a mic to you. But,
Oh, I can talk loud enough. I'm a teacher, former
oh,
teacher.
okay.
Do you know anything about the Fen treasure?
Forest Fen treasure. You know
No, I don't know anything
Does
about
anyone
it.
in this room know anything about that?
I've read about it in the paper.
Was the Fen treasure actually found in Kerwin?
No, it was not.
It was
That I can
found, but
tell
not in
you.
Kirwin.
And
Where was
I
it found
heard it
then?
was found, somebody told me it was found in Yellowstone, but I don't know. I really don't. Yes,
I've seen several iconic photographs. I've seen several. That's okay, I can talk. Anyway, is it on? Yes. Check. Hi there. Anyway, I've seen a lot of iconic photographs of that structure that was like a scrawny, skinny structure. Was that shot that you showed me with all kinds of new covering on it? Is that where that iconic picture was taken? Because there used to be this single.
yes.
Okay, so they covered it up with that green stuff now, so it's not so.
Well, they're trying to preserve it for the future, but that's where the winch line went up and pulled the ore in those big buckets up to the surface.
So that is the prime shaft. That is the
But
main.
there's several of those up there.
Oh, okay. So, but the one you
That's
always
the
see the
one.
photograph of, that's the one.
And that's after the end of the road, it's a half a mile further up
Okay,
behind the lock gate.
great. Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So how many shafts are there actually? You know?
I don't know. There's two that you can see very easily. Most of the others were going into the side of the hill that are called tunnels. Usually they find a vein on the surface, and if the vein goes down, then they dig a shaft down. And like my talk on Eagle Creek, Earl Crouch dug down with his shaft, and then he looked at it, and then he went down to the bottom of the valley and went in with a tunnel till he hit the same vein. I mean, people get kind of crazy when they start going after gold, in my opinion. Anyway, does that answer your question? Yes, anyone else?
Any other questions for Bob? Yes.
Bob, you mentioned that AMAX went in with 10 trailers. What was their purpose? Were they also hoping to find minerals, or?
Why
what
did
were they wanting
AMAX
to
go
do?
in with 10 trailers? Were they hoping to find gold?
They were looking for gold, copper, silver, lead, and then the bottom dropped out of some of those minerals, and they decided not to continue mining, and they put it up for sale. The trailers for housing for the workers and for offices, and they really widened the road to get the trailers in and out. And then the outfit that bought all of that from AMAX divided the Kerwin mines and gave that to the Forest Service. And then the Sunshine Ranch they gave to the Game and Fish, which was quite something. And I'm sure that AMAX didn't get a lot of money or when they sold it to the outfit that ended up giving it to the Forest Service. I don't know that much about that history. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else? Yes.
Who actually owns Kerwin now? You mentioned the Kerwin Holdings. Is it who owns that? Right
That's
now?
the question is, who owns the Kerwin mines in that whole area? That's all now owned by the Forest Service. It's been reverted back because what's the name of the company that I thought I had it written down here. Anyway, a foundation bought it from AMAX, and then they divided it up and gave the mines all to the Forest Service. So it's public. It's for you and I and people to come in and look, and they're trying to save the buildings from totally deteriorating. Most of those buildings are over 100, 120 years old. Have I answered your question?
It was back in 1992, and the Richard King Mellon Foundation and Conservation Fund purchased all of the Amex holdings and donated to the Kerwin Mining District and the Double D Dude Ranch sites to the U.S. Forest Service, and the Sunshine Ranch was donated to the Wyoming Game and Fish.
Thank you, Matt.
That's the last entry on the timeline, by the way.
Any other questions? Thank you for coming.
Bob?
Thank you.
Don't
Yes.
forget him, you'll be upstairs signing books.
And Robin's going to be there with a few of these books, that, and they're for sale for $5. That tells the Carl Dunrood story.
This is a book called Let's Go. It's a biography or an autobiography of Carl Dunrood.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.